Hello and welcome to The Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to The Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Andy Chatham, co-founder, DIMO. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Grayson.
I'm excited to have you here because the market is changing. Well, the market's changing with its ups and downs and turbulence. You had the collapse of Argo AI, the coming collapse of Embark file, according to their SEC filings. DIMO's building. You're sitting there and building. You're rolling up your sleeves. We're going into a potential recession downturn, but you're building, which is impressive. Why build? Why now?
So our roots are in the autonomous vehicle space. I spent about 5 years prior to starting DIMO working with some of the leaders in the AV space, all the way back to our overlap down in Florida, building autonomous shuttle networks in master plan communities, all the way up to most recently I was working on a team on the Waymo project through my old employer Transdev, where we were helping them scale up their operations. And our CTO Yev came out of building dispatch systems and other infrastructure to support autonomy at Ford. And we saw the industry progressing a lot more slowly than we would have liked in 2018, 2019. And a lot of that we think was due to an underinvestment in the infrastructure around the vehicles and everybody trying to make robo-taxis work as a specific use case that ultimately we felt like was going to address a very small percentage of trips and result in a service that was maybe too costly or unscalable. And we've really focused on our efforts in particular on what we can deploy in front of consumers now today and how we can leverage some of the existing vehicles out there and the capabilities that they have to deliver a useful product and service, and also build the infrastructure that we think is needed to be able to support autonomous vehicle operations into the future as the cars start to get more advanced. And I think everybody is sort of retrenching around a different version or a different vision of the future than they all had back in the heyday 2017, 2018, when everybody was raising these massive fundraising rounds and declaring that they were going to solve level 4, level 5 autonomy in major cities in the US. And I think now the vision that companies like Mobileye had and were able to sell into OEMs like Ford and GM and Volkswagen is starting to come to fruition, where, like it or not, you're seeing a lot more driver assistance technologies be deployed and actually get into the hands of consumers and for that to kind of make contact with reality. And for better or for worse, that's the trajectory that we're on today, where cars are becoming more intelligent. They're taking over more of the driving task from end consumers, but we're still waiting for that first deployment where millions of people are able to actually take their hands and eyes off of the road and give control over to a computer. And I think you can have a different opinion about when that might happen, but there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be built in order to get us there. So that's what we're doing. And we think we have kind of a unique approach to how that works. And we can get into the details on that in this conversation here.
You're certainly right. The market's changing. ADAS is coming along like a fast-moving roller coaster, pretty much out of nowhere from 0 to 60 in, say, 2 seconds. But with the rise of ADAS has come that I own a self-driving car. I have a self-driving car. It does this. And you're trying to explain to them that you have a highly advanced version of ADAS, or you have an SAE Level 2, and that goes right over their head. But the one trend that's coming that a lot of people don't necessarily agree with, and I think it's going to be the biggest trend that will upset, let's call it the status quo today, personally owned autonomous vehicles are coming. Consumers are clearly demonstrating by their love affair with ADAS, which they think is quote unquote a self-driving car. They want it. The demand is there. If that happens, what happens to the robo-taxi business?
It's a good question. I think there will be some real markets in which robo-taxis are able to deliver value to consumers and provide a useful service. And back in the day, when I was starting in the mobility space at Transdev back in 2013, the big question was whether Uber was going to get into airports or not, and what that was going to do to their super shuttle business and black cars. And there were a bunch of people in a conference room saying, it's never going to happen. They're not going to get into the airports. They're operating illegal taxi services. And it kind of reminds me that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes a little bit. And I look back to that day and that period of time and thinking to myself as a young person who is very fond of the Uber service, like, this is going to work whether people in conference rooms like it or not. Like, consumers are very in favor of it. And you don't see quite the same with some of these early robo-taxi services. People are interested in the novelty of it, but it's not necessarily better than getting in an Uber or a Lyft at this point in a lot of different ways. Like, the services are slower. I've ridden around in lots of different robo-taxis, and I've never gotten where I was going faster than I would have if I had an Uber or Lyft driver for the most part. So there's some pretty big questions out there that still need to be solved. And I think ultimately, taxi trips are a very small percentage of total passenger miles in the US. And in the US and Canada, most of the developed world, like the vast majority, whether you like it or not, of customer miles and consumer spend on transportation is personal car ownership. And the OEMs understand that and benefit from it greatly and are now starting to realize that all of their investments in developing any kind of automation or ADAS type feature really needs to make its way into mass market consumer vehicles in order for them to be able to justify their investments. And it sounds like something that is relatively simple and straightforward, but back in 2017, the dominant narrative was that robo-taxis and shared mobility are going to take over an increasing percentage of trips. And especially with the pandemic, like, that just hasn't happened. And I think there's a lot of other sidecar trends that are happening alongside that. And vehicle connectivity is a big one, the increased deployment of ADAS features into cars. And, I think our take on it is cars are going to get smarter, they're going to get more connected. And the biggest thing that's missing is the infrastructure and the support ecosystem around those things to help them collaborate and work together and interact with things like parking garages or terminals at an airport and really be able to deliver some of those complete trips for people, whether it's in a personal car or in a robo-taxi. And one other area is, I think it has not really slowed down as much, with the exception of, some companies falling out of the race, so to speak, is automated trucking. And that's an area in which, I know you've had a bunch of people on the podcast to talk about, and so I won't retread that ground so much, but I think there's still a very clear use case there where a full trip can be completely automated for trucks. And that's something that's likely to happen in the next 3 to 5 years along certain corridors. And autonomy, as always, is going to be an issue of where and not necessarily when in a lot of cases.
That's a good question. I've been thinking a lot about this. Another controversial statement here in question for you. If Tesla can figure out FSD, I said if Tesla can figure out FSD, that changes the market because consumers love it. The brand is valued. The brand is cherished. They already think it's a self-driving car. Now, what if it really becomes a self-driving car, or Tesla has a major breakthrough if they do, here's filing, say, put radar in there, and let's say they can go up to a level 3 system. What does that do to the market?
Well, one thing that we're very sure of is that it will increase the value of the data coming from the car in some relatively non-obvious ways, right? So in order for a system to cross from level 2 to level 3, which for people that are not thinking about this stuff every day is basically when the car takes over responsibility for what is happening as it's driving down the road, sometimes at 60, 70 miles an hour. And in that scenario, and what I've seen personally as a result of operating autonomous fleets of vehicles, is that the data from that car becomes very interesting to multiple different parties, whether it's an insurance company or an operator or a regulator or the developer of the autonomous vehicle software. And they all have a claim to that data. And if there's an incident, you need to get in and be able to pull apart what happened. And the owner of the vehicle or the occupant of the vehicle is obviously their privacy becomes very important. And we think that there's still a gap in the market for something sort of like a black box on an airplane that needs to exist in order for these systems to really get to the point where they can become commercially viable and can actually operate at scale in a level 3 plus type scenario where ultimately there's a promise being made between the developer of the system, the manufacturer of the vehicle and the occupant of the vehicle that says, we will get you where you're going safely. And if something bad happens, you'll be able to figure out why, and blame will be able to be assigned to the right party. And like that just doesn't really exist in the market today. And so one of the threads that we're pulling on at DIMO is we want to give ownership of the data coming from the vehicle to the owner of the vehicle and the occupant of the vehicle, and make sure that they're able to do whatever they want with it, just like you can with a lot of the other systems that you're used to, digital systems that you're used to interacting with today. And that's like a big piece of the technology that we've developed. And it's not immediately applicable for autonomous vehicles today, but that's certainly where we're heading.
It's where we're heading. Data to the owner is going to become a huge issue. I studied the Mobileye filing, spoke to several individuals at Mobileye, started diving into this and all the data they collect. I said, you're going to have a very big problem. Why? I said, if somebody, a big mouth or a podcast host or somebody gets something to go viral here, says, you're gathering all this data. Why are you not paying me? Why am I not getting paid for gathering the data? They didn't have a good answer for that. Does that become a huge issue in the market where here's DIMO saying, okay, we'll gather the data. You can have the data. Here's Mobileye. We'll gather the data. Oh, we're not going to pay you. We're just going to use it to improve our algorithms. Does it come to a point where consumers are going to demand to get paid? Perhaps it's a reduction in their lease, reduction in the vehicle if they agree, because opt in. Listen, if you go to a website now, you have to opt in to select cookies. You buy a car, you lease a car, you don't have to opt in to share data. Senator Warren or somebody in Congress is going to wake up one day and say, folks, we've got a privacy problem here.
Sure. One of the things that I think has happened in the last couple of months that has brought an unexpected level of awareness to consumers around the importance of data in AI systems is something like ChatGPT, where people are now interacting with an artificial intelligence entity that was trained for the most part on their data. Now, it's not my specific data, and in a lot of cases it's just the open internet now, but there's more plugins every day where you can put your own data inside of it and have better responses come out. And self-driving cars for the most part are no different, right? Like they've been trained on millions of miles of data. In the case of Mobileye, trained on data that's being collected by people who don't really know. And people are going to start to ask more questions about the nature of those systems. And ultimately, I think a lot of it is driven, for better or for worse, by incidents happening in the real world. And when those incidents happen, people really want to get to the root cause. And in a lot of cases, that's quite difficult to do because you're abstracted away by a couple of different layers, right? Like if you're in a Ford Blue Cruise or GM Super Cruise vehicle that has a Mobileye system in it and something happens, there's 3 or 4 different parties that are involved that really have to come to the table in order to be able to pull apart a specific issue. And one of the only ways that we think that can effectively be addressed is by opening up the data and giving custody over it to the end user, whether that's a fleet operator or a consumer, and letting them have their own copy. And there's a lot of benefits to that as well. And once we get into the part of the conversation where we talk about the developer platform on top of DIMO and why there's no apps for cars that people really like today, like that's also a big part of the equation here. And so with autonomy specifically, I think people are getting quite a bit smarter about the nature of these systems, and that's going to lead them to ask questions that are going to require next generation solutions. And yeah, it all comes back to the data and who owns it at the end of the day.
It's simple. You have little kids, this saying, why? You just have to ask why around the data, because privacy is going to play a very large part. Because you say, oh, data's the new oil. I don't agree it's the new oil, but it's a very significant potential revenue stream. If you're going to help capture the data, you should be incentivized and compensated for that data, and that becomes a passive income stream for you. Think about that. We'll look and say, consumer, we have a job shortage. We're going to go into a recession. People need to make income. Well, my vehicle, I drive around, I gather data. I should get paid. And you can make an economic argument there. You mentioned fleet operators. You come out of TransDev. You know the fleet word very well. You know how to operate in planned communities, which you were doing at Babcock Ranch. You know how to operate on public roads, which you were doing with Waymo. What can a fleet operator do with the DIMO data? What is the benefit for them? Do you put the DIMO device in the vehicle? What are the benefits to a fleet operator?
So let me give just a quick overview of what DIMO is. DIMO is an open connected vehicle platform. We've built ways for people to attach their car to the network that we've built with a software connection if their car is already connected to the internet. So today we have over a couple thousand Teslas, for example, streaming data every day to the network. Those you can just log in with your app and we pull the data from the Tesla API. We also support about 90% of newer vehicles in that way. We also have a hardware device that you can plug into your vehicle and start pulling data from it. And it supports cars all the way back to 2008 today. So we have a network of close to 10,000 vehicles that are streaming data every day. And we give very simple insights back to the user, like here's how much gas is in your tank, here's where your car is, here's trip data that you've collected. And the whole purpose of doing this is to solve the problem that you brought up, which is the data is the new oil is not quite correct, right? Like it's actually more, one of my favorite quotes is that data is more like sand, where it's useful if you have a lot of it and you know how to combine it into something else new. You can make a computer chip out of it, or you can make concrete or cement, So what we do with the data from the users once we've helped them collect it from their vehicles is we turn it into products for developers that they can use. So people are building next generation insurance products on top of it. We have plugins to maintenance services. People are building games with the data from DIMO vehicles, and it's all opt-in, right? So as a user, we look at it as we're helping users collect their own data and then enriching it and helping them find higher purpose with it, whether that's directly monetizing it. In some cases, we have folks paying for access to the data on how people are using charging stations or how their battery in their vehicle is performing. So there's this very direct exchange of value in that case. And then what we're really excited about is helping developers build products and services that couldn't exist otherwise, because the integration challenge of convincing 10,000 people or more to connect their cars to one network and making that available through one API is just way too high of a lift. And so that's really what we're focused on, is making it super easy for folks to create next generation connected vehicle products that solve problems for consumers. And we have solved a huge problem for developers, which is how do I get started? How do I build an app with data from cars to answer some question or to provide people with time and money savings or to drive more business? And we have a great group of very early adopter users on the platform today and are starting to get more and more people growing at about 20% a month, joining the network and contributing data and also getting value out of it. So yeah, happy to talk about any of the apps or use cases and can go into some of the details on how we're actually connecting these cars and some of the more technical details if that's helpful.
The battery health monitoring is very interesting, especially if I'm Hertz. Hertz is very public in their EV ambitions, and frankly, their board is very smart because it's going to cut their maintenance costs. Embrace EVs, cut maintenance costs. It's really good. But these vehicles are being driven a lot. I recently went down to the Florida Keys, and so I start looking at all these cars on charging. They were all Hertz Model 3s. There was more Hertz Model 3s than Suburbans. That was a big tell sign there. People want the experience of driving the Model 3 when you're going to put in 100,000 miles, let's say 150,000 miles, and you're not necessarily going to go to 80% on your charge. You're going to go to 100% on your charge. You might not drive an EV all the time. Well, I got to have it 100%. I still have 70, but I have to go to 100. Where battery is going to degrade. Is battery health monitoring one of the most important features that you've built for fleet owners such as Hertz?
So we certainly provide insight into how to take care of your battery in a way that the OEM might not. And one of the big points of emphasis for us when we're building a product is, does this work, or a new feature in our product is, does this work across all of the vehicles we have connected? So, most of the OEMs today, Toyota is the biggest OEM and they have 15% of the cars on the road. Maybe Tesla is up to 2% of new vehicle sales or something like that, rough order of magnitude there. So they all have their own connected vehicle products and they all have their own ideas about how the information should be displayed to you as a user. And we've created a layer that kind of makes it so that you can have a Tesla, a Ford, a GM vehicle all in the same app. And if they're all EVs or if you have a plug-in hybrid, we can provide you insights into how your battery is performing in the real world. So how quickly you're able to charge it, how quickly it's discharging. When you are repeatedly charging it from 0 to 100%, we can give you insights around, hey, this is going to degrade the value of your battery over time, and say things to the user that is reflective of our relationship to them, which is we're not trying to sell them a new car. We're not trying to make the car look better than it is. We're just giving them the data back and layering on information on top of it. And so with EV owners, they're all very interested in the data from their car. And that's why they're a large percentage of the users on our platform today. And we've started to create a lot more higher level insights and intelligence out of not just the performance of the battery, but also the performance of the charging networks that they're plugging into. And you can see some of that up on our site today. And we have customers on the B2B side that are starting to pay for aggregated data and insights. And we're working on developing more consumer-facing products that can help people report how their interactions with charging stations are going and ultimately give them reporting in the long run about how their battery health is impacting the value of their vehicle, which is ultimately what most people care about.
The charging network reports, okay, that's interesting. So I have an EV and I use Electrify America and I find it very good. And I went to an Electrify supercharger and I was able to get, it was a 350. I was able to get 310 out of it. Really, really impressed. Other times I go to the 180, I get about 140 and I've had a lot of luck, knock on wood, with the Electrify America network. Some of their competitors that will remain anonymous for this conversation have been horrendous. My wife said we might as well just get a plug and plug it into a 110 outlet because they've been so slow. So are you gathering the charging speed data where, okay, here, I've had the success on Electrify America, and then some of their competitors, I've had no success. Are you gathering and aggregating that data saying, if you're a consumer going on a road trip, you're going to want to use X, Y, and Z chargers because historically we've seen these actually perform at peak performance?
Totally. We get thousands and thousands of charging sessions a day from public chargers, and we pull all of the data we can from the vehicles plugged into them. So it's, with Teslas, you get every 5 seconds or so a ping from the API saying, here's the current state of charge, the rate of charge from the battery. And basically you can back into how their charging network is performing. And you can also see things like a consumer showed up at this charging station location, but was not able to successfully charge. And we're starting to open up pathways for people to provide more qualitative data about their experience at charging networks. And there's some cool projects out there. One of them was done by a YouTuber that we follow. It's called Rate Your Charge, and it's on Twitter. You can see people posting their experience with specific Electrify America or Tesla Supercharger or EVgo stations around the country, and they're using it as kind of like a grassroots, bottom-up way of kind of reporting the ground truth data about what's actually happening with these stations, because that's still one of the biggest impediments to non-Tesla electric vehicles coming into the market and people feeling comfortable with them. And we think we have, a really unique perspective on that because we support every vehicle on the road. And one other piece of analysis we've done is start to give people a score of, gas car drivers who are interested in getting an electric vehicle. We have a lot of their travel data and patterns and driving behavior collected so we can show them, here's how easy it would be for you to transition to an electric vehicle, and you wouldn't have to change your behavior at all. You'd only need a level 1 or level 2 charging station at home. And that's the kind of next level stuff, I think, as more people start to consider EVs, that we can provide to people because we've helped them collect a lot of their driving data and we can put it to work for them when they're trying to make a decision in the future.
That makes a big difference. On an earlier podcast, I had Russ Mitchell from the LA Times on, and we had a whole conversation around charging anxiety. Russ tried to go from Berkeley, California to San Diego, California, and then he did a trip throughout New England in the Boston region. And charging anxiety, he said he couldn't find reliable charging. That's one of the biggest detriments. Another thing is that there's all this talk, you don't need 400 miles of range. My EV has 400 miles of range, and I actually use it on road trips, and it works phenomenally. You have to get to that 385 to 410 to 420 range. And it works absolutely phenomenally. And you start to understand why range matters, where there's all this, there's an famous investor says, it's all just a minerals that are trapped in the vehicle. No, I'm spending over $100,000 for a vehicle. I'm paying for one thing, convenience. And that's not stopping at a broken charger every 10 minutes.
One of our first reports that we did with our internal data science team was looking at range anxiety, and it's up on our site. We have the report up there now. One of the things that we found with about a year worth of driving data from over 1,000 Teslas is that Tesla drivers rarely experience range anxiety. And it's something where when it happens, you never forget it. But with most folks, like 90% plus of the users on our platform, at least, they get under 20% charge on their battery once a year, maybe. And so it's one of those things where it's really hard to build for that use case. And in a lot of cases, most folks could get buy with 100 miles of range on their EV, but they would get anxious about it much more frequently than they would like. And so one of the things that I think we have to add to the conversation is the ability to show someone, you've hooked up your gas car, you've been driving around for a year on DIMO, now you're thinking about getting a new vehicle. Here's how much range you actually need based on your real driving data. And around you, there's this many charging stations, and it looks like you travel here to go to work a lot. And like without sharing any of this data with a third party, you can get all this analysis and insight that helps you make the right purchasing decision and right size the battery on your car, maybe consider a plug-in hybrid or another option. And, a lot of this for us is really, we look at it as just a problem of giving users access to their own data and allowing them to make a decision. And range anxiety is continuing to be a thing that drives a lot of purchasing decisions, and providing people information about how likely they are to experience that, I think is a big step to mitigate it.
You're helping prepare an individual who might be nervous about getting an EV because you're mining the data. For the individuals that are on the fence thinking about, maybe I don't want an EV, maybe I do want an EV, I will tell you, not having to go to a gas station is a brilliantly, amazingly awesome thing. And you would be surprised at how much money you save by not going to the gas station. Even though oil's going down, it's going to go back up again.
You start every day with a full charge. Yeah.
You do. And that's how it goes. It's like, okay, boop, boop, away I go. Okay, you're taking your kids to school. Oh, I got to stop at the gas station. No, that's all right. I'm fully charged. It's a convenience factor, and I truly believe that the future mobility will be defined by convenience. It's going to come down to consumer choice. We have the individual that opted in, they bought the EV or they leased the EV, they got the DIMO system running in there, they're monitoring their battery health. Have you seen patterns in the data where their behavior changes from they used to go all the way to 100 and they're like, wait a second, I think I should go to 80 because I want to preserve this battery. I don't want to 3 years and all of a sudden I've got a $46,000 bill to replace the battery. Have you seen changes in behavior?
We certainly notice people who maybe drive 30, 40 miles a day, taking the advice that we provide in the mobile app, which is you don't need to fully charge your vehicle every day. And in fact, the battery health of your vehicle is probably going to be optimized if you keep it between 20 and 80%. And that's just kind of like a general rule of thumb. One way we see people changing their behavior around actually getting the data from their vehicle is things like tire pressure, which seems kind of silly. Like you just notice that you need to properly inflate your tires to get better range from your EV. And then we added a feature a couple months ago that shows real-time valuation estimates for cars based on the data we have from them. And we can provide very accurate valuation estimates for people because we know the odometer of the vehicle, the zip code that it's based in, and then we have other data points that we're going to start to incorporate over time. And so we've certainly, had a conversation yesterday with one of our users who said, I didn't know that my 2008 Honda Civic was still worth $12,000 or whatever, just the used car market craziness. So that's the kind of like information that we're generating with the data that helps users make better decisions about what to do with their car because they're aware that it has a certain market value or that they could trade it in and upgrade to an EV faster than they otherwise might be able to. So yeah, it's still very early days for that. And as we get into launching more third-party apps and integrations on the platform, there's going to be ways to monetize your data and turn it into discounts on services like insurance or better maintenance options for your vehicles and lots of other options that otherwise, we wouldn't go and build ourselves, but have tremendous value to consumers that are already connected.
Zach De La Rosa from Rage the Machine once sang, take the power back.
Yeah.
You're not raging against the machine. Well, technically the car is a machine, so you're giving the consumers the ability to rage against the machine, and they're taking the power back.
Yeah, I mean, look, the way we think about it is there's a couple of things that are not going to change like 10 years into the future, and having more insight and ability to collect and store your own copy of the data from these really expensive machines that you're spending, 20% of your income to purchase and keep maintained, that's going to be, tremendously valuable and probably only more valuable into the future, especially as our ability to like turn the data into insights and decisions increases and improves, which is, something that I think most people are in unanimous agreement about at this point. And one other thing I'll say is like, people have this saying, possession is 9/10 of the law. Like you can't do anything with the data unless you're able to collect it and store your own copy of it. And that's been tremendously difficult for people to do up to this point. And we think, with the ability to connect any car from any OEM and have one app where you're storing all of the data from all of your cars, like that's just something that didn't exist IP4. And so the long-term, like downstream implications of that for developers and consumers are going to take a while to develop. But ultimately, like we have some real use cases today, and there's some really big ones in the future. Like, how do I monitor the autonomous driving system that's in my vehicle? Like, and how do I make sure I'm optimizing the battery health of my electric vehicle? Like, those are huge tens or hundreds of billions of dollars worth of challenges and products to be built there. And so having the right infrastructure under them is really what we're in bootstrapping mode of right now.
If you put that to the backdrop of rising interest rates, the Feds in May, they could raise again. I don't see them lowering interest rates anytime soon. We've got Bloomberg's predicting a 60% of a recession. You've got all the talk now of a hard landing. An economic downturn's coming. I'm not going to predict when a recession is going to happen, but I'm going to tell you something bad financially is going to happen, and consumers are going to suffer as we look to break the back of inflation here. So I look at your data with DIMO, and I'm thinking, okay, what's the finance play? So if you look at this from a societal economic standpoint, consumers have leased vehicles. I don't know the percentage of leased vehicles are in the United States. What if you put the DIMO system on there and said, okay, Andy, you only drive amount of this. Okay, Mary, you only drive amount of this. Okay, Bob, you don't drive those. And they can refi their lease payments based on the miles they drive so they can keep their cars and not get it repossessed and not go into bankruptcy, have a ding on their credit report. That's a societal economics. It's controversial, but it could stave off a lot of economic harm. What are your thoughts?
My thought is that the car is the single biggest category of IoT device in the world. And for consumers, a lot of consumers in the US, it's the most expensive thing that they own. And they're either financing it or leasing it. And the market for automotive finance in the US is very competitive if you look at it from like a B2B perspective. Like, it's easy for a dealer to go shop around with a bunch of banks and get, a better rate for loans, but that doesn't always trickle down to the consumer. And when money is free and it's flowing and everybody's having a great time, people are less likely to look at their interest rate on their auto loan or the money factor on their lease, which is something that people don't even think about or know about at all, and kind of sweep it under the rug. And when an economic downturn happens or money becomes more scarce, credit is less freely available, people start to look at that. And we treat that the same way that we treat the battery data from a car, which is being able to more accurately value the asset and monitor its health and performance over time, really can only benefit consumers from the perspective of getting a better interest rate on a lease or a better interest rate on a loan or money factor on a lease. And we have partners on the platform today. Tenet and Caribou are two that help users refinance their loan and then capture some of the value when they get a better interest rate, and we're able to pass the savings back to the user directly, which is really great, and one of the ways in which the DIMO platform and network are going to become economically self-sustaining over time as we have more options for consumers to actually transact with the data from their cars. And so the way we look at it is the markets are quite efficient, but that doesn't always make its way to the consumer. And the more information we can put and the more options we can put in the consumer's hands, they'll be able to make smarter decisions and save money and time when it comes to things like financing their vehicle. And I think people will be able to create much more innovative financial products that help people get into an EV, because those are typically more expensive upfront, but cheaper to operate over time. And so, Tenet in particular is, a partner that's on our platform today that typically can save Tesla owners a couple $100s a month on their lease by structuring it so that, it properly incorporates the residual value of the battery. And like all of this stuff, consumer doesn't need to understand, other than that there's less money out of their pocket every month, and they're able to have, a cheaper mobility experience and maybe upgrade to an EV faster than they otherwise would. So that's a thread that I think we're going to keep pulling. And it's one of those scenarios where having more data is always going to be more helpful. And as a consumer, you can decide whether you want to share that with the counterparty or, keep it private to yourself. And there'll be a pretty clear trade-off associated with those things from a monetary perspective. And that goes to not just finance, but also insurance, right? Like, I think at this point, most people know if you're willing to share more data with your insurance company, they'll give you a cheaper rate. And not everybody's willing to do that, but at least you have the option as a DIMO user who's collected your own data. You have the ability to, decide if that's right for you or not.
You have the right, because that opens up the privacy debate. Then you got Ford. They file a patent application to turn off a car, turn the AC off, and repossess the car if Felicia doesn't pay the bill. That's scary. One is an invasion of privacy. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving a legal opinion on there. But what I will give an opinion on is trust. Just the fact that they filed that patent. Oh, we file all sorts of patents. Okay. I'm not going to comment on that. What I'm going to say, that's the fastest way to erode trust because that's going to come back to haunt them. I'm not buying a Ford Mach-E. Are you kidding me? They've got this patent that can do this, this, and this to the car. I'm going to go buy brand X, Y, and Z because Ford doesn't care about the consumer in economic situations. They're a greedy corporation. They stepped right into this Occupy Wall Street debate.
Yeah. So we have a lot of people on our team who have worked for automakers before, and we have a tremendous amount of respect for the difficulty associated with building a car and how hard it is, especially at the scale that a company like Ford or GM or even Tesla now are operating at. You have so many different competing interests and decisions and things that are getting made where oftentimes a little soundbite like, oh, they filed this patent to repossess your autonomous car. It's something that in hindsight, yeah, of course, it's a terrible PR thing. And I think it speaks more to, like you said, the trust, but also the separation that really needs to exist between the OEM of the vehicle and what happens with that car once it gets into a consumer's hands, right? And our perspective on this is that once you pay $60,000 or $70,000 more for a new electric vehicle, the data that comes from that car and the services attached to it really should be under your control. And I think people are starting to realize that with some of these newer cars, the way that they're connected to the internet is that they don't actually own the features. Like the BMW can turn off your seat heater or the Wi-Fi subscription in your car gets cut off. And like you didn't actually own that to begin with. The car is a connected device, much like your cell phone, where 3 years after you buy your iPhone 14, the battery life starts to go to shit because they release a new software update that kills your hardware. And so we look at that and we say, OEMs are in a tough position. One of the things that they can do to earn consumer trust is to give them easier ways to access the data and the features from that vehicle and to use it in whatever way they want. And I think a lot of OEMs are starting to come around to that, and they're realizing that the more open and transparent they can be about the vehicles, the more people are going to trust them, and it just creates a better product for them to sell to consumers. And they also get to leverage the creativity of all of the developers and data scientists out in the world who might take the product that they've built and build something cool on top of it. And they're starting to come around to that vision. And I think we've had a number of them reach out and say, like, how can we provide more data to DIMO? And how can we make, we've seen hundreds of our customers start to adopt this new app on top of our car. And they're actually like excited about it. And so that's cool to see, because in the past, I feel like all of the OEMs were sort of sold this slide deck that says you have to make money selling people not just the car, but the app on top of the car. And you have to keep all the data and monetize that. And people don't want that, right? Like they want the Ford because it's a great car. They don't want the software ecosystem that comes with it exclusively. Like they want to be able to use whatever software they want on top of their expensive vehicle that they've purchased. And so we feel like we're sort of firmly on the right side of history there. And a lot of the OEMs, Ford included, are starting to come around to that, but they're big, complex, dynamic organizations with lots of people that have different opinions and strategies, and so it's oftentimes hard to like draw a straight line between something that they're doing and maybe something that we think they should do in the future.
Is one of DIMO's goals to become the independent, trusted platform for the future of connected cars?
Yeah, and I would take it even a step further than just connected cars. We've built it as an IoT platform, right? And so any device that has a certain value that you connect to the internet is producing data and could be useful for applications. And the biggest problem in the IoT world is just how siloed everything is and how hard it is to build consumer-facing or fleet applications on top of it. And so we look at what we're doing as creating the first truly open developer platform for cars, and why that matters to consumers today is that we let them take control of this data asset that they're involved with today, but they don't actually own. So there's some very simple use cases today, but I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about around autonomous vehicles and battery health and charging stations, like those are all going to start to be integrated and incorporated into DIMO in a more comprehensive way in the future, and that's the direction we're headed in.
As you get more endpoints, more users come online, more data points come online, how are you going to build and maintain that trust with your users? They know, okay, DIMO started at 1,000 people, now there's 1 million people on here. How do you maintain that trust as you grow?
It's something we think about a lot. And, I think back to the question around how Ford was filing that patent, and it could potentially reduce trust for the user. Separating the different pieces and kind of giving them their own space. And we think about DIMO as a protocol, often like email or the internet protocol, where there's rules, right, about how you create a car, and there can't be two of the same car on the platform, and here's how you validate the data coming from a car to make sure that it's real. And so there's like these kind of core rules that you can't go against. And that's going to be really hard to change into the future. And then allowing people to show up and build whatever applications they want on top of it really helps push the intelligence and decision making and the benefits and the value of what we're building out to the edge of the network. So there might be a specific application that's highly useful for people in Key West, like charge my electric vehicle in Key West. And like for somebody to be able to show up and like build that application and have it work with a network of hundreds of thousands of connected cars just doesn't really exist today. And so creating that more kind of like the iOS App Store, the Android App Store, but for cars and more open is sort of part of the long-term vision, where anyone who has an existing business or service that could benefit from access to data from cars is able to show up and create that. And we're seeing dozens of developers today already take us up on that offer, even with just 10,000 cars connected to the platform. So, I think a lot of the issue of building trust in this sort of like Web 2 world that we've existed in, where you just trust Google or you trust Facebook, like that's getting syndicated out to the edge of the network now, where I trust my local mechanic or my local insurance broker, and they're able to access the data that I've collected myself. And that's a fundamentally different trust relationship than you buy this car from GM and you just have to trust that they're going to keep updating the software to it for the next 10 years. And if they don't, then your car stops working. And being able to push trust, I think, out to the edge where people actually live is a really big part of that.
Do you see the new apps and the features that are developed for your platform being driven by convenience?
That's one of the biggest selling points. It's either time or money. And then I think the third category is fun, right? And so there's a lot of things that you can do with DIMO that are fun for users, where we have somebody building a road trip tracking application and a way for people to collect different road trips that they've been on and see the data from them. We had somebody do a cannonball run across the country with a car that was connected to DIMO, so we have like all the data from that. And
was it Alex?
No, Alex probably, I bet he knows who did it, though. We're going to keep their identity. They're very early users of the platform, so maybe we'll have them share that if they want over time. But there's the convenience factor, but we don't really want to restrict ourselves to like just this will help you save money or this will help you save time. Like I think there really is an element of fun and adventure that we can build into this, and we're starting to see a lot of developers show up with cool ideas about how to take the existing like subcultures that exist within the car world and build apps for people that are like really into their Tesla or really into their classic Porsche, or have like a real JDM community of people who are like all about Japanese domestic manufactured cars. And like I think that's kind of the emergent stuff that's going to start to show up on top of DIMO. And wherever we see the ability to improve the core developer experience or the core user experience, we can pull bits and pieces into that. But mostly we're interested in empowering developers and businesses to build better things for people that use the data from their cars.
Well, let's cut to the chase. Future mobility. Fun. When you remove the driver and you can have an SAE Level 4. Let's go in the fast forward machine. No timeline. I'm not going to ask you for a timeline, but when we have autonomous vehicles operating, what fun applications do you see being built on the DIMO platform? Do you see a restaurant integration, perhaps an integration for wine delivery to the vehicle, or if you're feeling bubbly, you get a little champagne delivered? What fun do you see eventually being built there?
So I'll give you a story, and this might not be the most fun application, but it was certainly very fun at the time. I was living in the Bay Area, was working on the Waymo project, and I bought a Tesla Model 3 back in 2018. And they released the smart summon feature where you could like drive the car around with using the app on your phone. And it was like, I don't actually know what they've really done with that. I sold the Tesla when I moved back to the East Coast, but the initial version of DIMO that we were building, this was pre-pandemic, was just focused on enabling automated parking for multiple different types of cars. So we wanted to unlock the experience where you drive your Tesla or your Ford or your GM vehicle to the airport and you get out at the terminal and you walk away from your car and your car goes to park itself maybe 5 miles away and comes back when you return from your trip. And like that was a very clear use case, huge existing market, like airport parking at individual airports is just like absolutely massive market. And we went around and we kind of had like conversations with folks in a very exploratory phase with real estate developers who were thinking about 10-year master plans for like a downtown district for a city or an area around an airport, and they're all very interested in it. The pandemic ultimately like actually killed that idea because the parking business was like totally wiped out for at least a year, hasn't fully come back. But certainly those types of experiences where the car is able to be more of an independent agent that interacts with other systems like a parking garage or going to take itself to get washed and detailed or go charge itself, and like enabling connections between OEMs and fleet operators and third-party systems like charging network operators and car wash owners or parking garage owners. Those are the kind of experiences that we feel like, from a technical standpoint, are very possible today. And what's missing is the infrastructure to be the glue between the different pieces. And so a lot of the fun applications that you can create with next generation vehicles are really just going to be dependent on building that infrastructure. And that's really what we look at our efforts as being a key part of creating. And one of the big things about like a lot of these like sort of fun or unique experiences is that they're very unexpected, right? So like it's hard for me to sit here today and say I know what's going to be like the killer application for an autonomous car that can go park and charge itself, but like certainly going to like pick up deliveries for you or take care of some task that otherwise would require your full time and attention is going to open up a lot of possibilities out there.
It's going to open up a lot of possibilities, and it's going to create a lot of economic prosperity because entrepreneurs are going to create new businesses. You're sitting here and you're creating DIMO with your partners. Andy, putting this conversation together, in your opinion, what is the future of mobility?
Well, we were talking about at the beginning, I think before we started, everybody had, back in 2018, 2019, everybody had their own acronym. It was, autonomous, connected, electric. And I think those things are all still true. The future of mobility, though, at least in the environment that we're in right now, is solving problems for consumers. There is no more free money available for people to go and try every new possible scheme under the sun. Everything is going to be judged on the backdrop of, are people willing to pay for this today? Like, is there a business model for this now? And can we paint some picture between how this gets tried out in a small group of people to how this scales up to hundreds of millions of vehicles? And hopefully we didn't completely ruin the 10 years of low interest rates that we had to experiment with all these things. But I think the future of mobility is people picking out of the trash heap or the rubble, the recycling bin, so to speak, of all of these different ideas from the last 10 years and combining them into actual products that have real go-to-market strategies associated with them, are not just like science research that gets implemented in the real world because there's billions of dollars to spend. So that's really our approach, is taking a lot of the stuff that's already out there and putting it together in a way that actually delivers value to consumers. And most importantly, I think the biggest thing and the biggest theme I want people to take away from this conversation is that there's a tremendous amount of creativity at the edge of the network. And transportation is inherently a very decentralized thing where there's local traffic laws, local rules, all of the infrastructure is different in different places. And being able to incorporate all of that intelligence and create the global hive mind of productivity that's necessary to implement a lot of these technologies is something that I really challenge companies like the Ford, GM, Tesla executives that are in their corporate headquarters to think about the people at the edge of the network and how they can contribute and use the connected vehicle assets that they're building and how they can open that up to really leverage the creativity of people everywhere.
You have to leverage the creativity. You have to build a company with real profits that generates revenue that's growing, because there's no more easy money. There's a rising rate interest environment. Andy, if a listener's sitting here and says, "Oh, DIMO, this sounds cool," where can they go download the app and order the device?
Yeah, DIMO Mobile on the iOS and Android App Store. We share a bunch of information on our website. It's dimo.zone, ZONE, DIMO.ZONE. And then you can follow us on Twitter. We're very active on Twitter, DIMO_network. And yeah, it should be very easy to connect most modern cars software only. And you can also buy one of our hardware devices on shop.dimo.zone and get started if you have, an older car.
Take the power back, take your data back, build the future, because the future is bright, the future is autonomous, and the future is DIMO. Andy, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today.
Thanks for having me, Grayson.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.